So now we want to move into the next part of our event, which is a panel. And Phil Taylor is going to be leading us in this next piece.
There once was a poet named Phil, a global ecologist with incredible will. In land, sea, and field, with heartwarming zeal, he toiled until all, even humans, were healed.
You're very kind. That's an amazing introduction. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, I'm delighted to be hosting this panel. Do we have all of our panelists currently online?
We have Dave and John.
Okay. I'm happy to get rolling, or just wait a minute. I'll defer to you.
What did I miss from Elizabeth?
A beautiful poem about me.
Geez. That's what happens when you show up late.
Yeah, your poem's coming in.
I'll put it in the chat. You don't want to miss it, John. You don't want to miss
Yeah, send it over.
It's too kind. Yeah, I appreciate that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Phil.
Go ahead. Okay, let's do it. So first of all, welcome everyone to this exciting panel entitled Harnessing Your Passion, Turning Thought into Action. I'm Phil Taylor, co-founder and ED of Mad Agriculture. I'm really excited for the panel and our guests, Danielle Nierenberg, who will be joining us soon, of Food Tank, Dave Vetter of Grain Place Foods, and John Fullerton of the Capital Institute. First off, I just have a great deal of respect for everyone on the panel. Over the years, I have looked to each of these individuals for guidance, yet I've only had the pleasure of knowing Dave Vetter. Grain Place Foods has been and is a radical beacon of change and hope in rural agricultural society. And we use that model to help decommodify food systems in the Front Range of Colorado. And I just really appreciate his work and his team over the years. Food Tank has hosted some of the most important gatherings and community dialogues shaping the food system. And some of my earliest learnings about regeneration have come through their online conferences. And then John's white paper on regenerative economy, has really helped us at Mad Agriculture give shape to our new perennial fund, which is a radical transition loan for farmers transitioning to regenerative organic agriculture. And so first off, I just want to say thank you to each of the panelists for your leadership and role in my journey, whether you know that or not. So I'm honored to be here and hosting the conversation. I'm going to skip long intros and just get to the meat of the matter and begin the discussion by asking each of the panelists, just share with us, who you are, what's your life work, and a little bit about how you got there. I don't want to spend too much time. Try to keep stories can be exactly that long and juicy. But I'm really curious about, how have you come to your life work as a leader in this space? Maybe John, we'll start with you.
Wow. Hi, everyone. So I guess my story in a nutshell is I went to work right out of college, motivated by the idea that finance and economics would determine the future course of human civilization based on some courses I took in college. And so I went to Wall Street with some fairly naive and idealistic ideas, and found myself sort of swept up in the wave of derivatives in the 1980s, and then capital markets in the 1990s, and slowly began to question what I was doing and the sort of initial motivation for the work, and got increasingly restless and curious. And when the merger, I worked at a little bank called JP Morgan, and when the merger with Chase happened in 1990, it really gave me an opportunity to take a pause and step back and reflect a bit. And so I used that opportunity to take the summer off with really no plans about what I was going to do, but many questions about what my purpose, what my life work really was after 20 years of slugging it out on Wall Street. And then I walked into 9/11 by chance. In fact, it was literally the first day I decided to go back into New York City, and I had a meeting with a guy who ran a charter school company, and I'd already invested in a charter school business back in the late 90s. So I was already doing what we now call impact investing, even with Morgan's money, as strange as that may seem. And I had a meeting at 9:30 in the morning on September 11th downtown. So I was right there when that all happened. And that kind of pushed me into an even deeper kind of think period, and spent honestly years questioning what my purpose was, what my life was meant to be about, and why I was no longer content with being a successful banker. And started reading a ton of books and discovered people like E.F. Schumacher and then Danielle Meadows and Limits to Growth, and came to learn that everything I thought was true about our economic system and about capitalism was only partially true. It wasn't false, but it was only partially true. And that it had some fatal flaws that were actually the root causes of the destruction of the planet. And it was all these smart young whippersnappers like me who thought they knew everything that was actually driving our society off a cliff. And then the whole inequality issues began to become more pressing. And I just basically concluded that my 20 years on Wall Street was really just training practice, a training program for participating in this monumental rethink of economics and the role of finance in it. So that's pretty much my story. And I founded Capital Institute in 2010, really because there was nowhere to go to explore these questions at the level of depth that I thought was necessary. So yeah, I've found my life work. It's sort of crazy. I'm fortunate to have the freedom to explore the really big questions and the impossible questions that most people don't even ponder because it sounds like boiling the ocean. But that's my story. I'll leave it at that. Great to be with everyone today.
That's great, John. We'll circle back to some themes that you touched on there. Dave, I'd love to hear from you. What's your life work and how have you gotten there? I think you're on mute, Dave.
I work.
There you go. You're live.
I just got out of the combine a couple minutes ago. So I guess I have to go back to when I was a small kid on the farm, because my dad drug me around to county fairs, state fairs, and threshing bees and stuff like that with a whole table of displays on organic and sustainable agriculture. So that was my experience as a junior high kid, and that kind of stuck with me. And in college, I got diverted from a trail toward medicine. I took a field ecology course, and medicine lost its appeal to me really fast. And from there, I continued working in that area and on the farm and stuff until my dad had to quit farming. And I shifted gears and started studying soils at the University of Nebraska, and went from there to seminary because I had planned to work in missions with agricultural local agri systems, and my experience there told me that our approach to missions was not just. We were asking people to do things and take risks in what we were proposing that we weren't taking ourselves. And so we felt like that if we were going to be honest about our approach, we had to take those same risks and demonstrate what we were trying to talk about. And that's what led me back to the family farm in the end. I was fortunate enough in seminary to get involved in an experimental program that allowed me to pursue things in agriculture along with the aspects of ministry. So that was a nice fit. My advisor in that program was Fred Kirschenman. And so we worked together for a number of years and still do from time to time. And that's kind of what got me started there. But I really saw through my work there that the only way we could treat people around the world, our friends and neighbors and those that we don't know, with justice was to respect the environment and to honor our soils. And so that's been the focus of what we've been doing ever since. And when I came back to the family farm, one of our major objectives was to see if we could develop a management system on the farm that made it self-renewing and self-sustaining as much as we could without being dependent on outside inputs. We've been working with that for about 20 years now without buying anything from outside, and continue to see some improvements in our soils. But that also led us in the beginning to try to develop markets for other farmers to see if we could encourage them to take a different management path. Fortunately, we have several in the area now that are doing that. So,
yeah, I think I can attest. I was at Dave's field day last year and have put my hands in a lot of soils across the world, and those were some of the finest that I've seen in Nebraska. And so, great job. I want to just point that out. It was a real treat to be with you on your land. Danielle, I introduced you. I'm glad to have you here. Food Tank, we haven't met before. Food Tank, has been a really important place for my own growth over the years, and I've appreciated your leadership. And so this first question that the panel is kind of wandering through and exploring is, can you tell us a little about who you are? What is your life work? And, how did you get here?
Thank you so much, Philip. And I apologize for being late. I was finishing up a podcast, and so I apologize. This is such an honor to be among this group, among the panelists, and among all of you. So again, my name is Dani Nierenberg. I am the co-founder and president of Food Tank. My co-founder is Bernie Pollock, and we started Food Tank about 7 years ago with this very simple sort of idea of highlighting stories of hope and success in the food system. And it was based on a lot of the work that I had done traveling in the global South, listening to farmers and agronomists and scientists and women's groups and the whole range of food system stakeholders, and really hearing their thoughts on what it would take to overcome hunger, poverty, obesity, climate change, food loss and food waste, and a whole bunch of other issues. And that was around, I traveled to 26 countries in sub-Saharan Africa between 2009 and 2011. And while I had done on the ground work before and had been a Peace Corps volunteer, I was kind of warned. I'd been to the continent of Africa before, but I was kind of warned that, you're going to see some bad things, Danielle, and it's, you're going to not come back with a lot of hope in your heart. And I came back with exactly hope. I came back with a lot of excitement about what I was seeing on the ground, projects and innovations and studies and all sorts of things that if they had a little bit more research behind them, a little bit more attention, and certainly a little bit more funding and investment, that they could be scaled up and out and replicated in different ways. And during that time, I was working at an environmental organization in Washington, D.C. It was where I went right after graduate school. I studied at Tufts at the School of Nutrition and their agriculture, food, and environment program. We always called that the hippie program. It's where I met and learned a lot from Fred Kirschenman, who I know is such an inspiration to so many of us. And I felt like that environmental organization, it was started by Lester Brown. It was called the World Watch Institute. If you'd asked me when I was 16 years old, where I wanted to work, I would have said there. So it was always an honor to work there. And I learned so much. But during that time, I realized that, I wanted to go beyond sort of focusing on the problems and really talk about the solution the variety of solutions that exist to so many of the problems that our food and agriculture systems are facing today. And I really wanted to amplify the work of individuals and organizations who are doing that work. I think so many of us who work in the food system are kind of trying to recreate the wheel, and what we wanted to do as an organization is to, really highlight, spotlight, and again, amplify. To give you a little bit more background, I grew up in a very small town, or at least it was small when I lived there, called Defiance, Missouri. And my parents were those city folks who moved to the country to try to raise their kids in the fresh air. And looking back on it, I had this very idyllic childhood. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a huge garden. I raised ducks and pigeons and rabbits. I had a pony. I had like a dream childhood in a lot of ways. But, as I grew up and sort of became interested in environmental issues, I had this, sort of distorted sense of how farmers were treating the environment. And I blamed them for, destroying the rainforest, or, the issues that we were just beginning to learn around how the climate was changing. And so, very naively, as a college student, then as a Peace Corps volunteer, thought farmers were to blame. But once I started working with farmers more directly as a Peace Corps volunteer, I kind of realized that I was I was the dumb one. They weren't. They were doing all of the right things. I was riding on the back of motorcycles with extension workers and farmers, and learning how to beekeep and learning how to grow shade grown coffee and do all of these things, and really realizing the intersections between health and the environment and what farmers are doing every day in fields and forests and kitchens around the world to really improve the food system. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. I always like to say that farmers know best, no matter what size or they are, or what they're growing, because they have taught me so much, and I've learned so much from what they've been able to do, whether it's in Iowa or Mozambique. And so it's again a real honor to be at a conference where so many people are involved in creating a regenerative, restorative, more inclusive food system that can really not only nourish us all, but really nourish the planet. So thank you again for having me, and I apologize again for being late.
Oh, not a worry. No, it was perfect timing. You were just teed up. Yeah, I appreciated hearing those stories. The second question where I want to take this is, I think for a lot of people on this call, they're here because they want to figure out how to make a difference, how to become a leader, how to translate these ideals and beliefs that we hold so dear into action. And I would love for us to reflect a little bit on the personal transformation that begins within to create that outer work. I think of Gandhi's wisdom, be the change you want to see in the world. And I think that kind of developing of the soul requires tending, it requires cultivation, it requires work, it requires light and dark cycles, it requires human evolution. It's messy, it's yucky. And I think that for many young people in particular, new to this journey, it's a hard road, to find your way in life in many ways. And so I'm just curious, where do you individually source wisdom, inspiration? Do you have practices of self-care that enable your growth as a leader? What is the process that you commit, that basically, what is your process for committing to a life of turning the tide and going against the grain? Like, are there, I heard some things, mentors, Fred Kirschman came up. I heard, containers for growth, like being at World Resource Institute, that was a container for growth. I also heard a lot about life experience, working with shade grown coffee, working in the guts of JP Morgan, going to, the developing world, so to speak, and saying, my goodness, I'm not willing to take this risk. What are those sort of pieces of your own process and journey that might be nuggets of wisdom for others that aspire to be leaders and change makers? Maybe we'll start with you, Danielle, since you were just on a roll there.
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've learned, especially over the last 7 years since we started Food Tank, is that I'm going to make mistakes every day, you know, a lot of them, and being okay with that. I think before, when I was not just a researcher and a writer, but my focus was more on research and writing and not trying to run an organization and do all this other work, is that, you know, making mistakes is okay. And that's where I've learned the most. And I think I feared, so many of us, I don't consider myself a perfectionist, but I as a kid, I loved an A+, right, on my paper. But I also, as somebody who grew up as a writer, I also loved red marks on my paper from, editors and teachers. And I think being able to learn from mistakes has been something, and to embrace them, not just learn from them, but like, I kind of enjoy the process now of making mistakes. And I know it sounds weird, but I think that's where I've learned the most. And I don't make them on purpose just so I can learn, but I think it's sort of just embracing that idea that you're going to make mistakes and they're going to probably happen every day, several times a day. It's okay. And it's just as long as you're learning from them. But I think in terms of having, that tending of the soul, what a beautiful phrase, by the way, it's being able to sort of remove yourself from this work. I mean, I think burnout is something that is a danger to all of us who are so committed to the regenerative movement or the food systems in general. And I think taking time for yourself, having, these sort of outside interests that aren't always around food, or that, you find a way to relax. For me, it's exercise, and it's, reading novels that have nothing to do with food, but those, you have to have some sort of outlet to do that. And then just on that subject of mentors, I was so lucky from the time I was in elementary school till the time I left graduate school to have mentors who helped me along the way. People I still call now, people who I can talk to about everything from, a problem that I'm having, trying to figure out how to write an outline for a book, to, personal issues, and so I think keeping those mentors in your life, finding them, right, and then keeping them in your life is really essential. And and at this point, I can say, that I have had young people who've interned either with me at the World Watch Institute or interned with me at Food Tank, who I've kept in touch with, who've kept in touch with me. And I get a lot of fulfillment. I think as someone in her 40s, I'm also looking to find mentors who are younger than me. I think we have so much to learn from youth. And my staff is full of people much younger than me, and I consider them mentors in so many ways, because they are offering such a different perspective. They're thinking about these things in ways that I never could have, 20 years ago. And so I'm grateful for them. And I think that's all, something that we could all sort of aspire to, finding those young people in our life to help teach us.
Mm-hmm. John, I'm curious to hear from you. What's your sort of practice, and where do you source inspiration and wisdom and that kind of self-care routine that allows you to do what you do?
Well, I might answer the question slightly differently, just to share probably the most important thing for me personally has been to kind of shed my ego. When I left Wall Street, it was literally years trying to will myself to the answer to the question, what next? And I had PowerPoints and pitches, and I was just basically spinning my wheels and growing increasingly frustrated. And so I was doing a lot of reading, as I mentioned earlier, and I discovered, I was reading some Jungian psychology, and then I discovered a book called Synchronicity, which was written by Joseph Jaworski. And the idea of synchronicity really just landed like a personal message to stop trying so hard and start listening. And I discovered that the answers were right in front of me I just wasn't seeing them. And there's one that's very relevant to this conversation. And I see I see Danielle on the call and Trey. But I had written, the first thing I wrote in my kind of new life was a piece called The Relevance of Schumacher in the 21st Century. And someone sent it to Alan Savory, who I'm sure many of you know. And he was, to use his words, sitting in Zimbabwe in his mud hut. And he read this and he saw some kind of Wall Street guy who understood something about holistic thinking. And he sent me an email out of the blue. And I'd actually heard of him by then because I was intrigued with the whole idea of carbon sequestration on the grasslands. But I knew nothing about cattle and ranching, and I'm a water guy, not a prairie guy. But lo and behold, that connection was the key to my life work, which was to reimagine economics and finance through a holistic and then now regenerative lens. And that's just one example of a long string of synchronicities that have landed me in this work. And so to me, that's the sort of the source code. And it doesn't mean every coincidence that happens is the right answer, but I've come to trust, as sort of woo-woo as this may sound, I've come to trust that the universe actually holds the path, and it's our challenge to separate the wheat from the chaff, to use a farming expression, and find who we really are and who we're meant to be. And once you do that, then everything falls in place.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. It resonates with me. I think in a world of urgency, it's very hard to slow down and shed those things that cloud your vision, like ego. And so that connects a lot with my own process of being able to launch Mad Ag. I had to do the same thing. In the moment where I felt the most appetite to be urgent, I actually had to pause, sort of go slow to get fast sort of thing.
Exactly.
So I like those paradoxes that exist in all of our journeys. Dave, I'm curious to hear from you. Your response to this sort of area discussion is.
Yeah, I don't know where to start. I suppose one of the things was growing up and my dad's long-term outlook on what it really meant to take care of the earth. So that was always there behind me. And then to find some really good connections when I was in seminary. Fred Kirschenman has been a big part of that in my life. By the way, he was my first organic convert.
Really?
And
you need a badge.
So, but the relationship is such that we can have not seen each other for a few years, and we can sit down and have a beer together and not say a word and still have a good conversation. And so that's those kinds of things are important to me. And Wendell Berry's work was an important piece. And I got to know him in the mid 70s, and we've kind of stayed in touch since then. So there's a period through the 90s, if I needed a shot in the arm, I just went and worked with him on the farm for a while. That rejuvenates anybody. And so those are things that have been really important. But probably the other thing that helps me keep going is the number of young people that come and ask questions, and the number of farmers that have done that, and then companies, young companies or young entrepreneurs wanting to get started, talking about doing organic foods and being able to work with them and help them get started. So those things kind of help keep me going. It's really nice to see a young guy with a young family come and visit with you about developing an organic management system for his farm, and then seeing 10 years later that the local organic ag organization grants him the Steward of the Year award. So those are the kinds of things that really help keep me going and renewed along the way. So.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, there's so many pieces of that are just beautiful. And having been at your farm and been at your field day, you can feel that energy and that intergenerational connectivity, you know, as you see the ages and the people that are showing up and having fun and running around the farm and consciously or unconsciously being shaped in those moments. I want to shift the conversation a little bit more to the outward practice. We just focused a little bit on the inward, to talk a little bit about each of your work specifically, and kind of what is your theory or practice of change behind it? Like, you know, food systems are incredibly complex. Many things matter: grassroots action, policy, markets, capital, community, and more. You know, I think we kind of know why you're working in the arenas you're working, because your story leads into those arenas. But I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that arena. What's your sort of work or strategy in that arena? And maybe just highlight some of the tensions you might face in it. Like sort of, I mean, it's sort of fast, slow, right? That's a tension. Revolution or reform is a tension. Big versus small, local versus global. They aren't mutually exclusive, obviously, but they tend to be some issues we face. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about each of your work and kind of what's your strategy in that domain. Just give us a little sense about that for each of your enterprises. Maybe we'll start with you, Dave.
Well, that's changes all the time. When we first started getting inquiries about organic stuff, you know, our first significant customer was White Wave back in 1977. And working from there, I don't know how it worked or what the network was, but we got a reputation for our work with organic soybean production in Japan and Germany and Western Europe. And so it was the export to global market that really helped us get going and to help bring more farmers around to do that. And that's changed. We have, I think, 2 foreign customers yet, but we haven't really exported much to at all now for probably the last 25 years.
Yeah, Dave, could you, for
probably 90% of our market.
For people unaware of Grain Place, could you fill everyone in on what Grain Place Foods is and does really quick, so we can understand when you say import, export, what's going on?
Grain Place Foods was an outgrowth of our farm, realizing that we had to generate more value if we were going to make a small farm work. When I came to the farm in 1975, and we started converting it to an organic management system immediately, we were probably 1/3 to 1/2 of the average farm in the area. Now we're probably somewhere around 12 to 18%. And to stay competitive with, and to be able to support that farm and the staff it takes for the kind of intensive management that we've got, we had to have higher value markets. And so it was a decision we kicked around for a long time, and my father-in-law I finally decided that we would rather try it and fail than wonder if we could have made it work. And so we did that, 1980, and we borrowed nearly everything to start with, and that was 1980. Our interest rates on that first capitalization was 18.75%. So that should have told you right up front that we didn't have any sense at all. But we made connections, and we got lucky here and there, and we developed relationships with a number of people that were, how do I want to put it, as willing to accept risk as we were. And that's changed, and we've always tried to develop local markets. So we still do distribution to food buying clubs, local stores, and restaurants in the Lincoln area, and we make distribution trips every run, and we lose money on every one of them. But that's an investment we kind of feel like we need to make if we're ever going to make some changes in our local food system. So those are one of the things that we keep doing. But we've also gone to higher value added products and doing some things that are a little bit different and unique in order to be able to pay farmers more. And we tie what we work with farmers to our customers. Organic corn, for instance, typical price right now is around $6.5 at the farm. And with our customer base and a group of customers, we can pay 9 to farmers. So we do that. And trying to do all we can to encourage them on the financial side of making rotations work. But the investment's greater, but a well-developed rotation also reduces risk. And it keeps, it's a changing thing all the time.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, just being at Grain Plays last year, it's fascinating to see the your place is sort of like an hourglass in the food system. You have all this network of farmers that need access to market up here, yet have no way to access it. And so Grain Plays is this hourglass of aggregation, distribution, cleaning, sales, value add, and then you release it out into this really diversified buyer community. And it's cool to see you making those connections. Even, Dave walks the floor at Expo West. And if you've been to Expo West, I know Carlotta's on the call, that place is like a party. Hopefully that happens again soon. It's just really cool to see those kinds of connections across generations, across brands, and watching supply sheds get rebuilt with regeneration from, soil to shelf to consumer. Danielle, curious about what your kind of theory of change is with Food Tank and how you see that creating change in the world, and what are some of the tensions you face in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I still don't even know if I understand what theory of change is, and I've been trying to figure it out for 15 years. But I think one of the things that Food Tank is trying to do, and what we started off doing, which was very important to me, and I think different than what a lot of other nonprofits have been able to do in this space, is, build a platform for amplifying the work. Amplify is a word that you'll hear from me over and over again. I mentioned it, probably 20 times already. Amplifying the work of the organizations and individuals who are working so hard in so many different ways to better the food system. And, we at Food Tank have often called it a broken food system, but it's probably, if we're talking about our industrial food system, it's working the way it was, set up to be. What we're sort of suggesting is that we need, a different kind of food system, one that, creates better access and affordability, that addresses racial and social injustice, that produces food that nourishes both people and the planet. And so there are so many organizations who are working on different aspects of that. Our job is to amplify what they're doing, and we do that. And we have a very robust news website where we're publishing interviews and articles, twice or 3 times a day. We've produced reports and books. A big part of our work has been convening, pre-COVID and still post-COVID for the last 7 months. For a lot of that, I was interviewing experts in the food system twice a day on our live stream, getting their thoughts on how COVID-19 was transforming the food system, talking about different issues around workers, obviously, around farmers, or obviously around restaurants, et cetera. So that, amplifying this work and getting it out to as wide an audience as possible, both domestically and internationally. But I think one of the biggest things for me, and the thing that I often get, most criticized about from both, whether it's the right or the left, is this idea of having uncomfortable conversations and bringing people who normally wouldn't even sit in the same room together to be on stage or to be on the same panel to talk about issues that are uncomfortable to talk about. How do we address reparations in the food system? How do we create better access? How do we talk about food apartheid in a way that is constructive? And so again, Food Tank gets criticized for talking to CEOs of corporations in the same breath as we're talking to food justice advocates. But I think it's through those uncomfortable conversations and having real, blunt, honest, open dialogue, and realizing that these issues are very gray, that there's, no one size fits all approach. There's certainly no silver bullet. that, you know, that's the way to get where we need to be. We have to bring more folks to the table. And whether, you know, you or I hate, you know, a particular food corporation, doesn't matter. They're, you know, they're still here. And we have to acknowledge them and figure out ways to either work, you know, with them, against them, or in a way that's constructive. And so that's really, I think you know, I'm not that smart. I don't understand theory of change that well, but I do understand hearing and listening to different voices and how important that is for making the food system better. And if we want real change, I think that's where it's at. Sorry, I could have said that much more eloquently, but I think this is such a great conversation. I wish there were more conversations like this. We're not seeing enough people have these kinds of dialogues during COVID, and I hope we'll have them on too. So thank you.
I appreciate that comment. Yeah, there's a theme that you remind me of, which is like the idea of living in the radical center. You know, this kind of concept of finding common ground despite differences. How do we create the containers in which we can have difficult conversations without demonizing each other? That supports kind of a both and movement versus either or. You know, that sort of criticism that we're so apt to in this hyper polarized world that we're living in right now. John, curious, capital, what are you working toward? What's your practice? What's your change? How are you what's your vision for making a difference?
Well, I share Danielle's kind of mystery about theories of change. I think I suppose we've all had to come up with one when we write a grant application, but other than that, I'm not sure we know what they really are. And I guess I sort of think that a theory of change might be a relic of reductionist thinking, to be honest. And kind of like what David said, it's always changing and it's got to adapt to the changing context. So my ground zero for how to spend my limited time and energy as one human being has really been this idea that I attribute to Dana Meadows and Thomas Berry, which is the idea of changing the paradigm or changing the story as the highest leverage point. And so at Capital Institute, we started, so if you think about my work, it sort of splits into theory and change. Or theory and practice, rather. Theory and change. Here, you got me brainwashed.
Gotcha.
The theory part is the Capital Institute, you know, quote unquote think tank, although I like food tank as a much better term than think tank. But and then my entrepreneurial investment projects, my impact investment practice is my practice part. And it's where I try to put the ideas in test them in the real world and hopefully prove that there's something valid about them. And but all of it is around constructing a new story of how the economy needs to work. And so we've done storytelling at Capital Institute. You know, my dream is that some brilliant storyteller will create some kind of a movie / game / reality show that will allow us to play out in real time, but not on a one-time basis, but a continual basis, this idea of a regenerative economy. And I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do that, but I just think we are so trapped in the old story because it's a 300 years of modern thinking and reductionist thinking that we don't even know it when we're trapped. And I suspect just trying to articulate a theory of change is just one more example of being trapped in that old thinking. So I'm with Thomas Berry. We're lost because the old story no longer works, and we don't yet have a new story.
That's powerful. I
think that. I sort of butchered the poetry.
No, that's okay. I got the point. I think we all did. I mean, I think that articulation of the new story is such a big theme, you know, of each of our work, and how that takes root and inspires and attracts others, I think is, we can only try our best, you know, and I think we're all sort of at the tip of, you know, a paradigmatic revolution that we're just at the beginning of something big here together. And that's a fun and creative and tumultuous space. And, I think kind of in that tumultuous space, I'm curious, before we move into Q&A, and everyone just please post your questions in the chat box if you wouldn't mind, if you have questions. Is there any advice that you would offer as people that are successfully navigating this space to young leaders? Where do you begin in translating passion to action? Where does one begin taking those ideals and putting them into execution? I'll start with you, Dave.
I questioned your use of the word successful.
I that was a tee up.
I think one of the things you do, if you've got a vision for where you want to go, just find a place to start and do it. I've listened to people talk about stuff for a long time and never do anything, but if you take that first step to do something, even if it's a misstep, that's how you get started. And that's what you learn from. Those missteps are the ones that really chart your course, as long as you don't give up on the vision. And that will be always a moving target, I think.
Yep. I confirm that in my own path. I think you shared some truth there.
I mean,
Danielle.
approach we took.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought Dave had more to say. So the question is my advice for young people, right? I think, young leaders are so much more ahead than I was at their age. And I think there's, that's probably because of things like digital technology and, they're more interested in food at an earlier age than maybe I was. But I think one of the things that I did that really served me well was just talking and listening to as many experts as possible. Like I would sort of, in both undergrad and graduate school, stalk, people I admired or stalk people I wanted to learn more from and really get their viewpoints. And I was, always very surprised that they were willing to take a half an hour or an hour out of their day. But most people are willing to do that. I do that a lot. Young people reach out to me and say, hey, can we talk about food loss and food waste? And, if you spend 20 minutes of your time doing that, I think it makes a big difference. But I think it's just, listening to folks as much as possible and seeking out those folks you want to understand better, or that you admire, or who you admire, and who, you think you can learn more from. I think one of the biggest things that I learned, when I was younger was I talk a lot now as part of my job, but really listening more, and sort of sitting back and sort of understanding where people were coming from. I think that served me well when I was visiting different communities in the global South, because a lot of those folks, no one had ever come to just really listen to them before. They people had come to tell them stuff and tell them what to do, and nobody wanted to listen to what they were already doing that was successful or interesting and that kind of thing. So I think, when I went on that tour of 26 countries in Africa, and I visited, 70 countries plus, I've always called it kind of like my listening tour. My life has been my listening tour of listening to folks instead of talking at them in a lot of ways. So I guess that's the kind of advice I would give.
Yep. John?
Well, those are two great lists of advice. I agree with everything that both David and Danielle said. I guess the only thing I would add, two thoughts. One is the power of gut instinct. I would listen to yourself first and foremost, and the second thing is to maybe recognize the unique moment that, if you're 15 to 30 years old right now, the the challenge you have to figure out your path is quite different than the challenge that any of us old people on this call or on this panel had. The context is changing much more rapidly. And so the experts are as confused as any of us, and myself included. And I do believe there's a new wisdom coming into the world with this next generation that is kind of unique, at least in recent historic, by historic comparison, where the pathways were fairly well laid out. I mean, when I graduated college, it was kind of obvious if you're interested in the economy, you went to work for a bank and you learned about finance. And, now should someone go work on Wall Street? People ask me that all the time. There's no easy answer to that. So I guess I would settle into the discomfort of the tumultuous uncertainty that we live in and embrace it as a unique moment, and not get overly flustered because it's not obvious what the right pathway is, and do what David said, which is just get started. And the relationships you build in whatever you do are likely to be more valuable than whatever the skill you learn on the job.
I love that. I think these are all wonderful little tidbits of wisdom and truth that we can all take to heart. John, there's a question coming in for you, which is, you who understand the real invisible hand and the power structures that rule our decaying economic paradigm, do you think that small is beautiful, the Schumacher reference, has a chance? Will the clusters of light that we see emerging around our planet really be able to come together as a world cluster and be that new paradigm we need to preserve our species and live in a thriving world? Easy answer.
Am I hopeful?
Yeah.
So I could talk for a long time about this, but I'll try to be very succinct. I think I'm a huge fan of Schumacher, but I don't think small is the answer. I don't think going back to a simpler time is the answer. I think we will collapse before we could go back to a simpler time. I think we have no choice but to go forward and transition into this, regenerative paradigm, this holistic approach where regenerative potential displaces exponential extractive growth as our source of prosperity. And that's no easy shift to navigate, but the system is so it's so deeply skewed and leveraged toward continuing the path we're on that I don't think retreating, if you will. I'm a big fan of Herman Daly's as well in ecological economics, but if we simply say that there are limits to growth, but don't provide a pathway out of that predicament, and it is a predicament, I'm not smart enough to see how things don't just kind of unravel. So we have no choice but to press forward. And the reason I remain optimistic or hopeful, and hopeful is probably a better word, and I'm not saying this to sugarcoat it, I am hopeful, is simply because the worse it gets, the more the pressure and the more likely it is we will make that shift. Just like if you put a pot of water on the stove and you turn up the heat, eventually it has to boil. If there's nowhere for the steam to run off because the top of the pot is sealed, it will collapse, it will explode. But there is a higher, there's a higher level of complexity, meaning boiling water, that system shifts to. And I think we're living through a similar shift, and it's by no means certain, but I see this regenerative movement compared to a year ago, compared to 5 years ago for sure, when I wrote my little paper, it's extraordinary how fast it's moving. And it doesn't mean it'll be easy, and it doesn't mean there won't be a lot of wreckage and damage that is going to take a long time to heal. But I just encourage everyone to believe in it's not that we need to fix it. We need to see the pathway that the system is trying to move and join in that, which feels like a much lower burden than us all having to fix it ourselves. And that's because the pressure.
Dave or Danielle, do you want to respond to that, or add, or perhaps differ?
I see in the basic of agriculture and the care and nurture of soils that I see limits to the scale of that for it to be done well. I think over time it's going to take more hands-on, and a lot of times the technologies we use to try and address some of those issues is self-defeating in the end. I see a lot of technologies in use today that the negative impact is that their cost to operate and maintain begins to dictate management instead of soil health. And those things concern me when we keep looking at higher and higher technology as a solution to that. We can do some precision stuff, but what does it cost to do that? And then what do we miss when we think we have the answers? Which I don't think we ever do. The only thing we've learned is that we don't know enough to make the decisions we make.
I like that. There's a question here for you, Dave, from a guest that says or asks, what can I say or show to my corn and soy conventional farmers to have them even consider a different way? They understandably, argue that it's too much risk, there's too much financial hit, yet they're struggling to feed themselves now. So what makes it workable to change cropping systems and practices?
Start small and do it. Every situation is different. So, we can talk about what I've done on the farm here, but I don't think you can take that across the road and necessarily make it work, because there's too many things in there that involves the individuals, the resources available, financial and soil, both of those things, and figure it out. I have neighbors that I heard at a farm sale one time speculating on how long we were going to survive. This was my second year. And the most optimistic neighbor I had was maybe 3 more years. Well, guess who was the only one still farming 5 years later? And I'm still here. And so a lot of people that were really skeptical of what we were looking at in the beginning, now at least are willing to talk. They weren't before. And so it's opened up the door for a lot of discussions. And we finally decided that maybe one of the best things to do was to make our big mistakes out by the highway, because that generated more conversation in the community. So, and that was probably less risky than the speculation. But yeah, it's a little piece at a time.
Mm-hmm.
We probably have 25 or 30 farmers within an hour of us now, when there were none when we started. So, but just show that it can be done. I mean, our yield averages on corn are very, very competitive, or exceed county averages. And we're not buying anything other than seed.
Wow.
And I can assure you, we're growing it at a whole lot less cost than our neighbors when I see airplanes in the air several times a summer.
Yeah, no, I think that's telling. I appreciate that. Yeah, lead by example. I think that's you've got to try it yourself, and that goes back to your early story of your mission work. You're called to home to try it.
I've got a quick story to share.
Yeah.
There's something about the farming culture and the ranching culture, though. It's a mystery to me. Many of you will understand it better, but I was down in Chile and visiting a savory hub. And they had these beautiful green pastures and life was relatively good. And literally across the street in the neighbor's farm was soil, erosion and gray, or rather brown, and it just looked like a wreck. And they wouldn't ask the neighbor what he was doing. They literally wouldn't talk to them. And then one day they noticed some little electric fence up on the farm that was the wreck. So they put electric fence up, but they still didn't talk to the guys to understand how they used them. They just put the fences across the field. And you can imagine how much impact that had, but they wouldn't talk to them. So go figure.
Yeah, there's many ways to attract change, I guess.
We've invited neighbors to come to our field days and for dinner, and have never had one show up.
What's with that?
Yeah, what's with that? Danielle, there's a question I think you're best suited to answer, which is, what do you think is most important for our youth to know about regeneration?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know if I'm best suited to answer it. I mean, I think that there are a couple of things to sort of unpack here. One is that we're leaving them with this climate crisis. This is ongoing, right? And if we're looking for a food and agriculture system that can address the climate crisis in a comprehensive, systemic and practical way, then regeneration and regenerative agriculture is the answer in a million different ways. And so I think that's the main lesson to learn, but that they can be a part of that movement. They all don't have to be farmers, right? We certainly need more young farmers in this country and all over the world, but they can participate in different ways. And whether it's becoming an advocate or a writer or a storyteller, some of the work that I try to do, and so many of us are trying to do, we're all storytellers, I feel like. They can take part in this movement in different ways. And I think looking, at what's going to happen next week with the US election, we have to build a system where people who are, food advocates are, feel connected to the political system. And, my friends, Marion Nessel, and folks like, Bob Martin at Johns Hopkins, talk about this idea of not just voting with your fork, right, but voting with your vote. And I think if we can, what we've seen happen over the last, 4 years, 3.5 years now, with groups like the Sunrise Movement and, the Gretas, it's not just Greta, but there are a million Gretas in places like Sub-Saharan Africa who are doing amazing things to re-energize a youth around climate and food policy. That's, if we can convince, if they can use that intense energy that they have to create a political movement that's around food and agriculture, I think that's where our power will come from, where we can, regenerative ag won't be seen as this sort of outside fringe thing like organic was, 30 or 40 years ago, but something that is the solution. So that, I think that's what I would, sort of advise to use your interest in food and make it political, because it is, and not political in terms of, you're a Republican or a Democrat and that's how you think about these things, but food is a political issue because everyone has a right to safe, healthy, nutritious, affordable food that they can access whenever they need. And that should be the mantra of this country, not some of the other things that we've been hearing, whether it's the last 4 years or the last 20 years.
No, that's brilliant. I think that speaks to the common ground that we all share and the true politic. What is the role of food and what is the role of ourselves in that system that touches every part of our life? We've got to wrap up. I've enjoyed this panel immensely. John, helped me clean some of my cobwebs of reductionism with that theory of change question. That was appreciated, John. Thank you.
Anytime, Phil.
Yeah. We learned a lot about listening, shedding ego, humility, expecting learning from failure, finding mentors, listening to the young. I like this idea of settle into the discomfort of becoming, embrace this unique moment. I think these are all themes that are universally true and that many of us are experiencing as a community on this call. And I just want to wrap up by leaving the group with a call to action from Adrienne Marie Brown. It's been my mantra for the year from her book, Emergent Strategy. And it's a question. Can you say this? Can you say, I am living a life I don't regret, a life that will resonate with my ancestors and with as many generations forward as I can imagine? I am attending to the crises of my time with my time and my best self. I am of communities that are doing their collective best to honor our ancestors and all humans to come. And as Dave says, let's get started.
That
was great.
Guys, I'm going to let
Well said.
my colleague over here take everybody into break, but Trey, forgive me, before everybody goes, because I wanted to get Daniela in case she's got to go. A huge call out to Danny for winning the 2020 Julia Child Award, which celebrates leaders who are impacting the world through food. You really deserve that award and the recognition that comes with it. And I know I speak for everyone in the regenerative agriculture space here in the US. We are so proud of you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was totally unexpected. I'm sorry for crying. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's, again, such an honor to be with you all. I'm so sorry.